indigenous Sri Lankan culture received multifaceted influences from foreign cultures, mainly due to international routes passing in the vicinity of the island. Their influences spread into hinterland through water and land routes, and were absorbed by societies, transforming Sri Lanka into a multifaceted, heterogeneous culture with rich, tangible, and intangible elements. Manawatu Samhita. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I'm your host. I'd like to thank everyone who's been listening regularly, and if you're a new viewer, welcome as well. I think the last episode did pretty well. In fact, this month's been another good one. I'm pleased with the channel's growth, and I've been getting our backlog back up on YouTube. Pretty standard. I think by the end of May, I should be updating that weekly along with the other feeds. So again, thank you all for listening. Wherever you do it, I really appreciate the support. So I wish I had a little bit more hard evidence to talk about in the last episode and for this one as well. But I'm sure that eventually the areas that we've been discussing will have a more detailed glimpse into what the people living in the regions we talked about last time and this time were like. This episode may be a little bit shorter. There was a Audacity update before I got a chance to start recording, so that delayed me a little, and then now it sounds like a storm's coming on, so I may have to cut this a little short, but I'm going to at least try to break 20 minutes. Next week we'll be back to a longer episode for sure, and I'm going to try to get another bonus episode out. I've kind of let those lapse for a little bit, but we'll see what I can do. So I know for one thing, I did have something I wanted to go over that I forgot completely in the last episode, and I remembered as soon as I had downloaded the episode and mixed it and had it ready for publishing. I didn't mention the origin of the term Deccan. I've been going through some etymological study stuff, and because I found that interesting, and it's important to kind of understand what people recognized things as, to kind of understand how we were developing in terms of thought. So Deccan comes into English from the Kannada language, and their word Dakhana. Now, Kannada is a Dravidian language. Today, it is one of the 3 most spoken members of the family. It has around, I believe, 45 million primary speakers, people who grew up and learned the language natively. And there are somewhere between, I think, 15 and 22 million secondary speakers. The other 2 more widely spoken Dravidian languages are Tamil and Telugu. And all the Dravidian languages have a similar word for the region. Though this may have been adopted into earlier Dravidian dialects and tongues from the Sanskrit word Daksina. There is debate about this. This word was used as an adjective meaning south. Now, there were other words in Sanskrit that meant south, like Savya and Anuttara. So, like hunting, I imagine that they were context sensitive. It seems that Daksina was meant to refer to the south of someplace, or to the south of where the Sanskrit speakers lived. And it came just to mean the south. I do wonder, though, if because they had other words that mean south, if it might be possible that Daksina might have been an endonym that the people of the Deccan might have had for their land and their peoples, and it was transmitted to Sanskrit, which then overwrote its old meaning. Or maybe people living in the north, they possibly spoke a Proto-Dravidian or extinct branch of Northern Dravidian, passed it on to the speakers of the incoming Sanskrit or the evolving Sanskrit language. Whatever the case, thinking about this has led me into a rabbit hole about which was the first culture to spread its kind of geographic terminology to other people and imposed it on them, and how it was done. It's been a time. I went on a deep rabbit hole dive, so I don't have an answer just yet, at least a definitive one. I have a couple of guesses, but it's something I'll probably report back once I have a better guess or maybe a firm answer. So please look forward to that. For now, though, I should move on and talk about the remaining places of the far south of South Asia before we turn back to the north. Now, I mentioned the Lakshadweep Islands briefly last episode. These islands rest between 200 kilometers and 440 kilometers, which is 120 to 170 miles. That's how far they are away from the Indian mainland, depending on where you leave from and which island you're heading to. And I definitely misstated the habitation of the island, at least that's provable. So far, there has been no evidence of permanent habitation until around 1500 BCE. Though I know that there are references to the islands from earlier sources, and this makes sense because people from India are sailing to and from the region during the Bronze Age. Why they neglected trying to live there prior to that, I can't say. And I would be willing to bet that they didn't neglect it, and there may have been small numbers of people living on the island sometime in at least the centuries prior to what the current evidence shows. I do wonder if perhaps these islands might have been occupied like the Andamans, which are on the other side of the subcontinent, when the water level wasn't as high. But after thinking about it, there probably wasn't enough lumber or wood suitable for making the kind of boats needed to travel there. But this is a region that we will return to and talk about the peopling of these islands later. Their name comes from the Malayalam language, which is the fourth most widely spoken Dravidian language, and it means the 100,000 islands. This is a exaggeration. There are a number of small rocky islands that are too small for people to live on between the primary islands, but nowhere near 100,000. But just due to the way the rocks are and the way the waves break and the lagoon kind of in between them, it makes it appear as if there's a lot more than there are. But there's only around 30 or so of these islands that are large enough to support human habitation. For now, though, let's talk about leaving the Deccan to go further south. The peak of the Eastern Ghats are more dispersed than the Western Ghats, and they have more paths through them, and more rivers flow down from the east to the Bay of Bengal, which help create passages through them. Now, as you head south, you descend from the plateau and you reach kind of a smaller, rugged, hilly region, and then from there is a sizable plain crossed by rivers to the sea. And from there, if you head to the southeast, you would reach what is now the island of Sri Lanka. Now, at various points of time, Sri Lanka is connected to the tip of the subcontinent by a kind of a limestone shoal bridge. Now, at various points of time, this land route is completely above the sea level, and in others, it is submerged in water. I couldn't get a firm date on how long this tended to last and what caused the fluctuations, but I could not get a firm explanation with solid dates in English. But it seems that the last time it was possible to walk back and forth from the mainland to the island was around 5000 BC. So, at least in this current context. Now, again, I don't know if that is something that is consistent, but it's very possible that, there was still regular foot traffic and some small level of trade between the mainland and Sri Lanka at our time. Now, it does again become walkable again later, but due to a massive kind of monsoon storm that happens sometime around the 1400s, parts of the bridge completely washed away. We will talk about that much later, though I should point out the bridge was never massive, and there were always major problems transporting large numbers of goods to and from the island via walking. The limestone kind of walkway was not great for transporting like large numbers of like carts and things like that. So most large scale trade happens via sea travel. And regular sea travel and expertise, is required. But it also makes the island and the easiest part to kind of travel from the southern tip of India to the island. It makes those areas very rich. And due to the kind of the geography of the island, and due to how deep that limestone shoal is, you can't sail directly from certain parts of India to kind of the best seaports in Sri Lanka. So you have to kind of sail around and circle in and then go out or continue around the west. So that is something that is going to play a factor in the region's development as well. I should also talk about the name of the bridge. In a lot of European and Muslim sources, it's referred to as Adam's Bridge. This is what the Muslims referred to the bridge as due to a kind of a story that they have in relation to Adam being made on Earth. And of course the Europeans, especially the Portuguese, that's a cultural reference that they understood, so they used it, though most Hindu, Buddhist, and some newer English sources refer to it as Rama's Bridge. That's the most common name for it by people living in South Asia and Southeast Asia. We'll go into the story behind that name and why it is called that. It's a pretty interesting tale. It's probably one of the more popular stories about Rama, at least when it comes to his cosmology and the cosmology of like Indian history. But that's the reason for two separate names. So just keep that in mind. I'll probably keep referring to it as Rama's Bridge. Though, if I reference a specific work, I may refer to it as as Adam's Bridge as well. But for now, just think of it as Rama's Bridge. Now, sorry, let me go back through my notes. Just make sure I'm at the right point. Yes, so humans have been living in Sri Lanka for at least 125,000 years. And this seems to have been uninterrupted up until our focus point. And even after our focus point, it's not really an interruption. There is clear evidence of continuity in the tool and material culture, as well as reasonable progression and evolution of those types of items. So there isn't any sort of massive change in the island's population or climate. There is a material culture that is recognized and kind of, set aside as its own thing, and that's known as the Balangota culture. That's a reference to a hill kind of in the central highlands of Sri Lanka. This culture, it's one of those that's debated on the time frame, but I think it has lost its cohesion. Probably about, I want to say it's around 14,000 years ago. So what we're seeing because of that kind of that breakup of that larger, more identifiable culture, at least at Balangota, you see kind of a number of groups kind of spread to different regions. They keep the same tool tradition, but they all start to develop kind of newer, independent lifestyles and life ways. And that includes things like proto horticulture, which of course could lead to agriculture. There is some evidence of them trying to do their own domestication of sheep and goats, though I could not get firm dates for that. There is some evidence that it may have been happening, right at the 8,000 year mark, or I'm sorry, 8,000 BC mark. But then there's also some evidence that it was happening a little bit later. And this would be things like, I think they have their own variety of goat or sheep, and as well as I believe the zebu cows are there as well. Though there is some debate about if this was a independent event or if this was something that was being introduced from the land to the south. If this wasn't some kind of small scale introduction from trade with the mainland. I'm of the opinion that it is probably something that they're beginning to do themselves, just because there are enough local varieties to kind of, support this. And, we see a lot of different cultures, especially ones that have been in areas for longer times, slowly begin to experiment as their tools reach a certain level of sophistication. But whatever the exact case, the people who are living there, they are taking up areas that are still in use today. I think there is one from around this time period. They found some skeletons and charred timber, kind of rough clay burial pots. Not true ceramics, but kind of like just burnt earthenware type deals. And this is something that, again, that you're seeing in more places further to the east. But that they have their own. They definitely have their own kind of style, even at this point. They're different from the artifacts you're seeing towards the west and the north. But some of those skeletons have even been found at what are now temples for Buddhists, different Buddhist temples. There's one, it's the Warana Raja Mahavihara temple. That's a very old Buddhist temple, and this is a sacred site, going back to a point where, the people living there are very different. They have their own version of dog that shows up, though I think that is actually dated to a later period. There's no firm, kind of record of dogs being on the island to a little bit after our time period. So I'll talk more about that when we return to the island in the next season, I guess. But as for the people who are living there, there's definitely some, indigenous, ancient Sri Lankan descendants that are still living on this island today. These are referred to as the Veda or Vidar, depending on if you speak Sinhala or Tamil. They are also sometimes referred to as the Wananialeto. I believe that's how that's pronounced. If I butchered it, I do apologize. And these are, there are several different, I guess, subgroups of these. Some make their homes on the coast, some in the mountains, and some just kind of in the, I guess, the center of the island as well. So they're kind of broken up, by region. They don't speak their, I guess their original language. Most speak Sinhala. I think some of their dialects have completely died out. There might be one or two groups that still speak, their original, or, whatever their original tongue's proto-language was. I was trying to find some more, solid stuff on this, but I couldn't really get a solid answer. I'll try to look into a little bit more. Most of the stuff I could find on it was Wikipedia, and I'm very hesitant about citing that as a source when I can. But I'll dive back into that when we return to this island, because these people are still, they're still around, and they're still a major part of the life on, the island until, they're kind of outgrown by, agricultural groups or, more organized, centrally planned groups that slowly appear on the island. And it might not even be fair to kind of characterize the current people at our time frame as the Veda. The Veda, they have a lot of unique practices, but they also have been heavily influenced by some of these outside groups that moved to the island. But I think it's safe to say that they are, they do have enough of their own like genetic history and identity to kind of classify them as their own group of people. They have some relationship to the Austronesian people, the people that inhabited Sahul and Australia. They have more of that kind of genetic makeup in their background than, say, like the Tamil people do. So, they kind of broke off, obviously, very early. Again, Homo sapiens have been living on Sri Lanka for about 135,000 years, give or take. I'm sorry, 125,000 years, give or take. So they are, I guess, they're descendants of people who broke off from that initial first wave out of Africa, the ones that kind of rushed across Asia to get to Sahul and Australia. And we'll talk about some of their religious traditions when we return. The number of Vetter people are very, very low. I think they only make up about, I don't even think they make up a percentage of the population. I think there's less than 10,000 these days that are like full-blooded Veda. But yeah, we'll dive into that stuff later. Veda is a Dravidian word. It stems from, I believe, the Tamil word Vedan, which means hunter, which is also very close to the Sanskrit word Vidhaya, which also means hunter. But again, Sanskrit has a lot of words for hunters, so this is probably a loan word from that Dravidian origin. rather than like a true Indo-European descended word like Sanskrit. But that's something we'll dive into a little bit more later. I should also go into the etymology of Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka is actually a fairly new term for the island, at least as a political entity. It's had a lot of different names over the years. Obviously, Ceylon was what it was known to prior to being Sri Lanka. And a lot of people have called it a lot of different things depending on your time period, what part of the island you're referring to, how many different political entities occupied the island, so on and so forth. But Sri Lanka itself is just, it comes from the Sinhala word Lanka, which is, it's actually very closely related to the Lakshadweep Islands. Lak. It just means island, basically. It's just like a different dialect or a different language. The Tamil word, which the Tamil are the second largest ethnic group living on Sri Lanka, Sinhala being the first. The Tamil refer to the island is Ilankai or Ilanka. So very similar name for it, but again, you'll find it named different things in different sources, which has led to some debate about if it's always actually being referred to in sources. There are some places that say, well, this means Sri Lanka. It's like, no, this doesn't mean Sri Lanka. This means another place, and that this is Sri Lanka. It's something that we'll dive into at different times. Sri Lanka, of course, much like other parts of South India, has its own kind of native crops that become valuable and make it a destination to want to get to or want to control, trade with. I think cinnamon comes from Sri Lanka. That's the big crop I know off the top of my head that is native to it. But we'll go over that in our next, in our domestication episodes. I've got to plan those out at some point as well. There are other items that Sri Lanka is home to that made it kind of a place that attracted people to it, and will eventually make it an extremely wealthy area. But yeah, so that's kind of what we have in the South, at least in terms of major groups and sites for now. So I think for next time, we'll go back north. We'll follow the Eastern Ghats, kind of go back up to the north and reach what is the Ganges Plain. The Ganges River being, of course, the eastern cousin to the Indus Plain and river systems there. These are sites of a number of different Neolithic locations, as well as Mesolithic. And then we'll probably do next episode, we'll talk about sites there, if there are any in Nepal and Bhutan. They're in that same kind of water system. So that next episode will probably take up all of those places. Maybe it might be a two-parter, we'll see. And then, of course, we'll move into Southeast Asia. And then I guess we'll have to decide if we want to go up to China or if we want to cover Australia and the rest of like Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. So, but that's for me to figure out. You guys just have to listen and enjoy. And speaking of, I hope you did. If you have any questions or feedback, please let me know. You can reach me at war@revpod@gmail.com. You can send me a direct message on Twitter, which I'll include the link to my Twitter feed in the episode description. And you can also, of course, comment on any of my YouTube videos, and I will kind of respond there. So feel free to kind of do that at your leisure. I thank you all for listening again. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a good week. Have a good night. Goodbye.